Hey everyone, Rushlock here, and as always, if you want the latest news and information for EVE Online, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below, and if you enjoy the video, like and comment, it always helps a lot. So we've got a post today from Dinkle, the state of EVE Online, summer 2022. The state of EVE is meh. EVE is not dying, but the game is not in a great state. I will try to point out the major issues that are factors in the overall malaise. Despite player calls for minor changes like fixing the hack meta and citadels are evil, the overarching issues with EVE are far larger when it comes to getting players involved with the game. If you think that ship balance is the fix, you can stop reading now. I'm already on board with this post. I like it. I like the position and the attitude, the direct call-outs to all those idiots you see on different platforms posting dumb ideas of how they're going to fix the game. I agree 100%. If you think ship balance or citadels are the reason that EVE is stagnating or having issues, yeah, you just go ahead and disconnect now. You're not going to like this video, so why sit there and be angry? Even the proposed changes to faction warfare seem to be a subtle shift compared to the big issues facing the developers when stepping back and looking at the wider reasons for dissatisfaction. Here are big issues that are difficult to solve any way you look at it. This is actually surprisingly refreshing and correct, not because it's from Dunk or a different person or like things like that, but it won't be popular to hear, right? Faction warfare on paper ideas spun around FanFest sounded great on the surface because that's all there was. They were on paper. Nothing had been built. Nothing had been developed. We're several months removed from that now, and barely anything has changed. They're working on it. They are actively designing concepts. I think they announced that in September we'll see some of the first iterations being tested, and that's great, but the potential of what faction warfare could become is incredibly higher than what we're actually going to get fourth quarter 2022. CCP at FanFest announced an expansion coming for the end of this year, and so far the only thing, well, I guess a couple of things we know about, but the only thing of substance, of quote-unquote contents, is the faction warfare update. And it's going to hit a much lower mark than CCP either wants you to believe or is just allowing us to kind of run away with the hype. And we're great with that. You know, you can count on people to do so without much effort from yourself. So maybe that's part of us shooting ourselves in the foot. But yeah, faction warfare, as hype as the idea of it being revamped is not going to be the solution this year. Maybe after a couple more passes, maybe deep into next year, we'll see something happen with it. It'll be dynamic enough to matter. But we are not going to see fourth quarter expansion, EVE Online, faction warfare updates that is going to be the high-reaching potential that it could have. It's also easy to take this as a spin from a null bear, grumbling, faction warfare is getting an update, and not null, and I'm angry. I don't get that impression from Dunk, but I can see how people could interpret it that way. And keep in mind, they being CCP, have repeatedly commented that design concepts and ideas that quote-unquote work or hit the mark in faction warfare can later be adapted, and that developments can pay dividends in both high and nullsec later on in the future. But if you're a high-sec main or a nullsec main, you have a higher chance of stomping your feet and not accepting that because you want something for you and yourself now. And you just have to get over it. There's nothing we can say is going to help you with that, so let's move on. Players have solved the game. This is huge and absolutely accurate. After almost 20 years, players have solved EVE Online. Almost every aspect of the game is min-maxed and players can completely optimize their gameplay. Burner missions can be triple boxed while live streaming. A single player can cloaky camp an entire region. An individual can build any item in the game from the base ores and gases by themselves with minimal interaction and other players needed. That last part is huge. This is what's missing from EVE Online. This is describing, what's gone on. This is the why. This is the what. This is the why. You don't need other players anymore to do most stuff. Now, part of this is just an advancement in technology. It is much easier to multi-box in 2022 than it was in 2003. And it was always getting easier and easier and easier. It's why you see this shift happen over time. It didn't happen with a single patch. But the bottom line is you don't need anyone else. I made a new character a weekend or two ago. Admittedly, it was Minmatar, and while the newbie zones were populated, I had probably a less than 5% interaction rate with people in locals. I'd answer questions, I'd offer to fleet up with people and do stuff, and that do stuff is what people don't want to see in the current market. Players in 2003, 2008, 2013 were a lot more likely and interested in interacting with other people to get stuff done. Nowadays, people come into the are already in the market and developed in a system from other products and things that they've seen previously in their lives, where that concept of collaboration or teamwork is foreign. It's what can you get done on your own? What can you min-max solo? Because you don't want to be dependent upon other people's schedules and life structures and conflicts of schedule and commitments and things like that. Dinkle goes on to say, every mission, anomaly, and event is detailed with recommended tactics in a hyper-connected environment, where any innovation or detail found by a single player will be in the hands of hundreds within a day and tens of thousands within a week. Absolutely true. Abyssal is a great example of this. When Abyssal was launched, it was CCP's stated intention that this would be a game mode that would be almost roguelike or procedural and keep people busy for a long time to come, and it simply hasn't. It isn't because Abyssal is bad. Abyssal does what it's intended to do very well, except for keep people unsure of how to do something for a long period of time. Again, if people do this and ignore third-party platforms, then yes, it'll keep them busy and losing ships for quite some time. But as soon as someone looks outside that in-game bubble, all that information is out there, and Dunk mentions this. Dedicated software connected to a constant stream of ESI data. I know some third-party devs that would cringe at the idea of it. Constant stream. Dunk is correct in how the function it preserves. I'm just seeing third-party devs post a lot about how they would dream of a day where ESI was constant. Allows players to have unparalleled knowledge of nearly every detail in the game. Allow even more optimization around near-instant action to events, whether in the market, in space, or in an organization change. In a grim dark world of internet spaceships, there are no mysteries, no wild unknowns, no risks that aren't understood and fully calculated to significant digits of accuracy. This is exactly on point. This is great. And keep in mind, this applies mostly to long-established players, right? A new bro doesn't know anything, but they have access to it very, very quickly compared to new players of the past. The only variable are the players themselves, mistakes versus flashes of brilliance, hunches versus hard proof, rolling the dice against poor odds, the willingness to grind for endless hours. In this part here, the only variable are the other players themselves, and when you're min-maxing, what are you trying to do? You want to mitigate or eliminate variables. So if I just get rid of other people who could screw up what I'm trying to do, then obviously I'm going to be doing it better, is the thought process of someone going in min-maxing as a new activity. He had some quotes in here from Buckman. Let's see, if there were no mystery left to explore, life would get rather dull, wouldn't it? Very parallel to Eve, right? The game gives players no reason to fight. We've been talking about this for quite some time, correct? The game design of EVE Online does not lead to war. Currently, wars in the game are driven almost exclusively by player grudges. Whether it is retaliation for a previous war or quote-unquote teaching someone a lesson, war rarely is over resources. That's correct. And once upon a time, CCP could get away with that, right? They could count on their player-on-player grudges and interactions to be the fuel. Now, people are not willing to fight unless it's quote-unquote worth it. That worth it is one of the most critically toxic, terrible, unhealthy aspects of the mindset meta of players nowadays, and unfortunately, it won't go anywhere. And I don't know if CCP can do anything about it, and I think Dunk is kind of touching on that with his post, is like, look, here are some problems, here are some issues, here are even some possible solutions that are going to be unpopular and heretical, but we don't know what else CCP can do, right? War is exceedingly expensive and rarely pays for itself in Concord's resources. Nor should it, in some degree, in my opinion. Like, I don't think Dunk is looking for instant gratification in this post, or the situation. But when a large block goes to war with large block, they shouldn't be recouping their losses while the war is going on, right? The war should be costly. The war should be expensive, and the hope, not the guarantee, but the hope is on the other side, things come of it that will help rebuild and restore back to break even and then pay dividends beyond eventually. But a lot of people don't have that kind of mindset anymore, and it's all about instant gratification. War is unprofitable to everyone except the arms dealers. Space is largely empty, with players only plundering the most optimal moons and anomalies. Near limitless resources are available, with only a fraction being harvested by players. Many of the changes introduced during Scarcity Era were intended to get players to move into new areas and create conflict. That did not happen. No large group went to war to control space in low sec to mine exclusive ores. They just buy whatever they need in Jita and ship where needed. Absolutely true. All the quote-unquote conflict drivers that CCP attempted for several years failed miserably. They did a great job of tightening faucets as intended and as required. That won't be popular either, but the faucet tightening needed to happen. But the idea of conflict driving never even occurred, not even close. And hindsight, of course, we always have the advantage of it, but even going into it, we couldn't see why would Ratters spread out? They're not going to. Maybe new Ratters will, and maybe CCP is very committed to this line of like, all right, those of the users who remember and hold on to the way things used to be and delude themselves into thinking that the faucets are going to open back up again if they just get angry enough, they will eventually piss off, right? And then the new batch of players will roll in and replace the old disgruntled ones, and eventually things will pan out. That could be the line of play for them. I don't know. Let's see. Without an in-game driver to fight, CCP is relying on players to keep the cycle of destruction going. Of course they are, because that's what's happened in the past. Not recently, obviously, but in the past, that's how things worked. But now, as we mentioned before, you cannot rely on that. And I don't know what CCP is going to do about it. Large-scale conflict and gigantic battles is what gives EVE Online onto the front pages of gaming sites. There are no articles on Kotaku about two small gangs battling it out in kitey bullshit for 20 minutes. CCP needs war to make headlines, but they are counting on players to generate them. All true and all unfortunate. Absolutely. Even, I don't want to get too distracted from the actual point that Dunk is making here. I just saw Kotaku and was like, Jesus, imagine the morons that go to Kotaku for information. But they make really good, line members, I'm sure. Unfortunately, the wars are getting predictable and repetitive with the same basic tactics and interaction between large groups in the game. The system and region names change, but the wars play out in a similar fashion, stopping when one side can't rally their troops enough and slink away in shame. And the worst part is that losing these grudge-based wars often result in players not wanting to start over or rebuild, preferring to simply walk away from the game while their corporation or alliance slowly deteriorates. Absolutely true. Who wants to, and this is obviously alluding to the Test Pappy Goon War recently, where Test marches to war, has overwhelmingly one-sided success, drives goons back to Goondor, realizes this is a crappy task to undertake, people get bored, go home in defeat. Were they defeated? No. They just got bored. Because it wasn't fun. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't quote-unquote rewarding enough. It wasn't quote-unquote worth it. And then, fail cascade going backward because all your members are demoralized to, well, what the hell did we waste the last 6 months to a year on? Nothing. Nothing mattered. Nothing changed. Everything we accomplished, quote-unquote, was meaningless. And when you make it meaningless, morale tanks and players screw off. There is little for experienced players to aspire to in the game. That's true. Part of that, though, is still going to fall on the player. EVE is always going to be a game where you have to set your own goals. If you want CCP to set your goals for you, long term, that's a terrible idea. And I'm not saying that's what Dunk's suggesting. It's something I just want the listener to think about as we go into this. Having new players being given goals early on is fine. It keeps them engaged in the short term until they can settle in. But long term, you want players making goals for themselves. As has been discussed before, not just by me, but by Hilmar himself, many players have reached the highest summits of New Eden and have not much else to achieve. Thousands of titans, tens of thousands of capitals, keep-star networks, fleets comprised of entirely command ships or marauders, pinnacles of achievement in the past, now commonplace and unremarkable. This is true. And this is a result of the faucets. This is what happens when you have a broken game state for years that CCP deploys strictly to make money. You don't blame the players for using broken tools, you blame the studio for putting the broken tools out in the first place. And now you have all this excess, all this stockpile, and nowhere for it to ever go. CCP wants these things destroyed, but is unable to provide a reason for it to be destroyed. When a player has flown every ship and tried multiple playstyles, they find themselves struggling to find something new or interesting to log into the game. New and interesting experiences are hard to come by in EVE over the last few years. While there have been good work on things like the arena events, filaments, and some live RP events, there has been no new mountain to climb for several years in the game. What is a long-term core player supposed to aspire to? That's one thing we have to look at. Anyone that thinks that a studio should be designing anything with long-term core player in mind is already approaching this in the wrong direction. These players don't matter. And that's hard to hear. Dunk isn't saying it, in my opinion. Not at all. I'm saying it. Long-term core players, if you're listening to this at all, you don't matter. This isn't being told to you to tear you down or make you feel bad. In a perfect world, it would open your eyes and make you go, oh, you mean CCP is looking to make money, and to do that they need new players, and that makes 5 new players infinitely more valuable than I'll ever be. But that can't be right. I've been putting in $15, now $20 a month in this game for 15 or 20 years. Obviously I have value. No. You had value, and now you don't. Not compared to what they can put their energy into going forward. These days, there seems to be nowhere left to explore. Victims of their very success, the explorers now pretty much stay home, Carl Sagan quote, and is applicable. This is what summarizes what Dunk's been going on about. There's no mystery in EVE, right? There's no, hey, what is that over there? I'm going to go find out. There's no frontier. And we won't have a frontier unless CCP can figure out some kind of way of making dynamic setting for dynamic content. Starting out EVE in 2022 is a recipe. Start playing with a tutorial, an emotional moment to set the hook, and then joining a corp for support. At some point, the new pilot grasps the possibility of the game and realizes exactly how far they are from some of the goals they might have. Want to fly a hacker logistics? Millions of skill points and months of time are between you and your goal. Want to fly one of those blingy marauders on an nullsec site? Grinding out the billions needed to fund adventures and expensive ships take orders of magnitude longer for new players thanks to the economy changes over the last 2 years. The time and effort of players has been consistently reduced in value. This part is correct. Well, the time part, I don't know about the effort part. If someone makes an effort, ISK is still easy in EVE Online, but you have to make the effort. The time part is true, and the reason the time part happened is because CCP wants the new player to buy skill injectors, or actually real money purchase Plex to convert into skill injectors, to quote-unquote catch up. Now, luckily for them, new players coming into EVE Online already accept that mentality. They've grown up on a generation of mobile games and microtransactions and DLCs. They won't even hesitate. They won't even blink. Now, older, probably 35, 40-year-olds and up, are going to cringe at that and be repulsed by it. Why do you care? You're already over the hump. You're already past that part. You're unaffected by it. You can not like the way the market has shifted, but the market doesn't care if you like it. Because again, the 5, 10, 15 people coming in to take your place make you irrelevant. So you can either fight for your spot, or you can just leave. CCP isn't going to care one way or the other. Keep in mind, it isn't like the distance travel has changed. It's that from Dunk's position, he wants you to know that it's harder to make ISK today than it was yesterday. And that's true. And there's a two-pronged issue there. One, it does help reinforce CCP's position of incentivizing monetization. But also, the way things was terrible. It was bad when expensive ships were being whelped because they weren't really that expensive. They were easy to replace. And the fact that they were easy to replace made their loss meaningless, which meant deploying them was meaningless, which means having anything to do with them was already meaningless. It's just more meaningless now because they're harder to replace, and now you have to actually stop and think about it. Compared with older players who grew their wealth in the past, let's not pretend that people used to make effort to make ISK, right? Rourke mining wasn't difficult. Super routing and Titan routing wasn't difficult. It was just a disgustingly broken faucet that just handed out free candy. Today's new players simply cannot be competitive in almost any area of the game. Of course they can. Open your wallet, buy some Plex, convert it to ISK, buy some skill injectors, and boom, you're good. You're fine. And new players coming in are going to do that. It doesn't matter if we like it. It doesn't matter if we would have done it. I wouldn't have done it. Many of you of an age to probably have more likelihood of listening to this wouldn't have done it. But guess what? They're going to do it. With billions in liquid ISK and even more in assets, how did this happen? Why do they have billions in liquid ISK and even more in assets? Because of disgustingly broken faucets. Older players completely control the economy and dominate the most profitable areas of the game, from manufacturing to high-value incursion and escalations runs to market trading. This continuous grind on new players takes its toll. No, it doesn't. They just go to work, and then they spend their money. Now, are there players who will sweat grind, free-to-play, to Omega, to... Sure, but they were setting themselves up to fail. If you play EVE Online, and your personal goal is to do things in the game that get you maximum ISK per hour, all you've done is sign up for another job. Now, it doesn't matter if you burn out in a day, a week, a month, or a year. You are going to burn out, period. And you failed on the first day. And it's also heavily on CCP's shoulders, and partially on the communities, for not intervening sooner to get to that new player and like, look, you need to find something that is fun to you, something you enjoy doing. And then let the generation of wealth be a byproduct of that instead of a focus. They are working far harder than the older corp mates they hear joking in comms about big losses or spending purchases ever did. Yeah, and that incentivizes them to go spend money. And how do you think those older corp mates got their money? From a broken game state. Retaining players for years in this struggling state results in fewer and fewer logins until EVE is forgotten for a game with greater ability to enjoy the fruits of effort. Where was the effort? We're going back to the effort thing again. This did not happen from effort. This happened from CCP handing out free pieces of candy in a different format. The whole people will just buy their way in to catch up is just as disgusting as when people were okay handing CCP money for their broken faucets. There's no difference. I could go on about the insanity of the effort required to maintain and manage a large group in EVE, or the inevitability of the N+1 paradigms leading to fewer and fewer groups outside the mega coalitions, but this article is getting deep into TLDR size. The following is heresy. It will make you uncomfortable. This is the good stuff. Dunk says, I am just an old man shouting at clouds, full of sound and fury, so forgive me a wee bit of heresy. There are no simple solutions to slow the wind down of enthusiasm we are seeing in the player base. I didn't know there was any enthusiasm at all. Maybe there's some sarcasm in here. It doesn't translate in text. The ideas we saw at FanFest earlier this year were not radical. They felt like candy tossed to hungry children, quieting their complaints for the moment, but not solving the true hunger that exists. This is all absolutely true. I don't see we're in this heresy yet, but I think we're going to get to it. Radical ideas are needed at some point. There are two ideas that rattle through my head time occasionally when I think about what radical options CCP might consider. One, wipe the server or start a new one. Yes, complete heresy and impossible. And he's right. It isn't going to happen. Dunk is pointing out how it would achieve the goal that CCP needs. It isn't on the board. It isn't a viable option for them. You know, EVE Classic, or whatever you want to storyboard the idea as, is probably more viable of the impossible options. Obviously, they would never restart the main server, but it would get them their goal, right? The CCP would love to do some kind of Thanos snap solution to eliminating resources and stockpiles and things like that, but it isn't viable. In the MMORPG Ultima Online, a new server called Siege Perilous was opened with a harsh rule set to slow progression and encourage conflict. Experienced players from all other servers converged on the empty place and reveled in the back to basics situation and new challenges. It didn't work though because people come into this new setting with decades of experience and knowledge already in their minds. Same thing we're going to next. Blizzard released World of Warcraft Classic and millions flocked to begin again and experience the progression of not just their characters, but the markets and literally the map of the world. Like many, I have done almost everything in EVE. Lost and taken entire regions, won and lost year-long wars, flown a Titan into combat, built a Keepstar from raw ore, led an entire alliance. Losing anything less than a capital is of no consequence, and even with capital ships, I have a hangar full of them, gathering dust. This last part is more on you, though. You're absolutely correct in that CCP has not provided proper conflict drives. 100% correct. They do rely on players to quote-unquote create the contents. But those players are tired. The ones who are willing to do it are exhausted. And CCP has not generated a new generation of those players that are going to do it themselves. Because they're sitting in Abyssal sites, grinding ISK per hour, stacking up resources. Just for the sake of doing it. Getting back to the day where losing a cruiser actually hurts might bring some challenge back to the game and make putting in effort feel worthwhile. Personally, yes. I would enjoy a fresh start server. I would enjoy what? I don't know the numerics of what would work, but like what, a 6-month, 12-month, 24-month, quote-unquote, EVE season? Sure. But what would it do? It would further depopulate the main server, would be the first cry I could imagine going out. It wouldn't really. In reality, you'd see people engaging with the IP or the product itself more. You'd see like the seasonal flows that you see in other games where things spike when it's brand new and early on, and then 3-6 months in, people go back to the main line because the newness has worn off. Collapse space, yes. Complete heresy and impossible. Dunk acknowledges it. I thought about this one before as well, where all this empty space exists for no purpose. It exists because once upon a time there were more people, but now there isn't, so all this space is pointless. And that's what Dunk opens up with. Most null and low sec in New Eden are empty. Besides the solo ratters, occasional miners, and the monthly moon pops, most systems in EVE are devoid of activity. Outside the core areas of the large group, space is empty. Roams are not roams, they are fleets heading to specific destinations where others are known to be. The same core areas are the sites of repeated actions over and over. The data from the MERs point this out. The chances of one roaming fleet bumping into another roaming fleet are basically zero. Imagine a battle royale scenario a la Fortnite, where systems disappear and the hegemonic empires are forced closer and closer. Buffer areas and floodplains cease to exist. Regions melt into each other, forcing conflict. Tighter and tighter the circle constricts until groups are forced to fight, not over grudges, but for simple survival. Possibly following this with some kind of growing expansion where groups can leap to newly open space like some sort of space gold rush. And I don't know, maybe there's something there with like the metaliminal storms can be used to shut down gates and funnel space together. Maybe there's some kind of potential thought line there. We're not in game development, so what do we know kind of a thing? But these are examples that Dunk wants to give of whatever happens. As he says, I don't expect either of these things to happen, but something big needs to happen. He's absolutely correct. CCP needs something of that scope and scale to address the actual problem. Art asset updates, alliance logos, a multi-year project to make faction warfare relevant isn't going to solve the problem. The risk of this beloved hobby of ours dwindling into oblivion is real. After 14 years of playing, you don't find a much more invested player than me, but even I find myself wondering what the world is like without New Eden. And here's the problem. Or a problem, I should say. You also have to look at it, what if EVE Online, what if New Eden just wasn't in your life? What would you do? Would you play something else? Would you develop new hobbies? Would you disappear for a year and come back? I don't know. Everyone's answer is going to be different. But keep in mind, EVE Online is far more likely to survive without us than some of us are to without it. And that can be sobering for people that have New Eden or EVE Online as their singular and or main focus hobby. They can't imagine a life without it because they haven't lived one. Look at that, 14 years. I played WoW for like 2 or 3 with the same people. And you know what happened? Their lives changed. The people changed. And then one day I looked around, I'm not playing with the same people I was playing with before, so I'll stop. It was that simple. It didn't happen overnight, but it was a process. And the same thing happens in EVE. I can't imagine playing the same game with the same people for 14 years and there being no change. Because there have been change. And Duncan mentions these changes. I can't ignore the downward slopes of graphs. I can't ignore the names that no longer appear in game. I can't ignore consistent process of seeing friends publicly quote-unquote win EVE. I can't ignore the fact that EVE needs a radical change. This, 100% on point. Perfect. This is called life. There is no method or system of game development that would change this. You're going to see people leave. Now, I would probably imagine Dunk would clarify this as it isn't the fact that people leave, it's the quantity, right? Or the ratio might be a better word to use. It isn't that 5 people have left in the past year that Dunk has known for over a decade. It's the attrition rate. There aren't new names coming in and new faces coming in to his circle at a pace that is outpacing the loss. And so that inner circle, that social network, is shrinking year after year after year within this hobby's perspective. And part of that does fall on CCP for the leaving part. The joining part, very much on CCP. But keep in mind, this also comes back on us, the user, to grow our own social networks instead of having them stagnate on our side as well. I'm not suggesting that's what happened on Dunk's side. I have no idea one way or the other. But it's something for everyone to think about. If you played anything with the same 5, 10, 15 people for a decade, that means it never changed. No new people were ever added. If you weren't constantly adding new people, anyone who raided in WoW or any MMO over the years knows, as soon as you stop recruiting and training, you're hitting stagnation, and you're gonna tip over to decline whether you realize it or not. That part's irrelevant. But yeah, that was a great post overall from Dunk Dinkle. The last time I posted a video like this from a Dunk perspective, I had people who I presume are in Dunk's organization in-game message me on Discords and other platforms, feeling like they need to come rush and defend Dunk's views and perspectives. And it may happen again, who knows, it doesn't matter. But keep in mind, it is okay for people to view things differently. It's that simple. People are not obligated to agree or see every single point the exact same way. That would be very boring. A lot of people build their lives and their social networks to make sure they live in an echo chamber and only socialize or surround themselves with people who think the same way, and that's their choice, and that's fine. But keep in mind, it's okay if we see things differently sometimes. I think overall Dunk hits a lot of great points here. I think I've pointed out the ones I disagree with. I don't think it's going to change Dunk's mind. That isn't the intention. We talk a lot about this on the stream, the live stream, where people have this idea that there's some kind of crusade to go around changing people's minds to think the way that you do. And that's a terrible way to enter into any engagement or interaction. Nothing Dunk posts is likely to change my mind on how I perceive things on certain topics, just like nothing I speak here is going to change Dunk's mind about certain topics and certain subjects. And that shouldn't be the goal. That shouldn't be the aspiration. The idea would be getting more people talking and sharing their ideas. Because the more people sharing their thoughts and ideas gains more perspective and more awareness. And who knows, if enough of us, all of us idiots, keep spitting out ideas, someone may accidentally stumble across a good one. But it only works if the most of us remember that that's the exception and not the rule. Hopefully you've been listening to this video at like 1.5 speed. It's like a 30-minute video at this point, much longer than I usually do. Again, as we said at the top of the video, hit the like button, leave a comment, tell us what you think about the various points Dunk makes here in the post. And until next time, goodbye forever.